Welcome to 5 Good Minutes.
You're listening to today's inspirational message on the book of 1 Thessalonians
with Dan Irvin.
When you hear the phrase, mind your own business, I don't think that would be something that most people would say, oh, that's found in the pages of Scripture. That's probably a phrase that you would more likely hear in an argument between husband and wife or friends. You know, Paul writes these words, though, in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 11, make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. You should mind your own business and work with your hands, just as we told you. You know, what Paul is talking about here, it's not cold or apathetic, but something much deeper and more loving is going on here. I think to understand it, we have to step back into verses 9 and 10 and see that Paul is commending the Thessalonians for their love for one another. He says, you're doing this already in a beautiful way. But he says then, yet we urge you to do so more and more. How do they grow in their love? Is it by stepping back? By not meddling? By learning to lead a quiet life? Yes, this is what Paul's talking about. In other words, loving people well sometimes means backing off. And this might seem a little counterintuitive. You know, we tend to think that to be loving, it means to move in, to step up, to take charge. But Paul is suggesting here that sometimes the most loving thing that we could do in the lives of the people that we know and that we care for is to let people have space. You know, have you ever had someone help you in a way that feels more like control and less like compassion? Maybe they give, unsolicited advice or insert themselves into a decision or have hovered over you in a way that is smothering, and it's not really feeling supportive, but it's feeling just like that. It's feeling like that. This is someone just coming at me. Here's the issue. When we start thinking about someone else's life or getting into someone else's life, we often stop trusting God with this person, and we infuse our own "this is how it needs to be" mentality. We confuse our role with His. We often mistake control for care. Paul's not saying don't care in this sense. We should care deeply about what's going on in the lives of the people that we love and that we know. But Paul is imploring, I think, the Thessalonians here to not control, to not overreach. We don't have to take responsibility for someone else's spiritual lives in a way that robs them from being able to fully trust and fully know God. You know, in the gospel, we're reminded that change is the work of God. Heart change, that's God's work. It's not our work. Real transformation happens not because we push people so hard, but because God is patient and powerful with people in the way that He deals with them. I think it's when we can understand that we can stop trying to manufacture outcome in other people's life. A beautiful example of this and a hard example of this is as you raise kids. So many of us, maybe we're raising kids in the way and we're pointing them towards church and towards God and towards Jesus. And we want these outcomes for our kids. But in many ways, the outcome is not up to us. What they decide to ultimately do with their lives and become in their lives, that has to be a decision that is theirs and theirs alone. And we can point kids in the right direction as we lead them, absolutely, and we should. But Paul is saying here to lead a quiet life. And in the original language, that word means to be at rest. It's not about being silent or uninvolved in people's lives, but it's about having a peace and a stability to trust God, to do His work in the lives of others, just as He's doing in us. Is there someone in your life right now that maybe you're over involved with? You're hypersensitive to anything that's going on in their lives. Maybe you're just trying to help, but that helping has slowly turned into micromanaging and helping maybe not so much. What would it look like in that relationship to say, God, I trust you to work in them in the same way that you're working in my life? That's love. Love that gives people the space to grow, not It's not a pressure to live up to a standard, but it's loving people enough to let them be. And when we live in this way, Paul writes about outsiders respecting the way that we live in verse 12, so that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders, so that you will not be dependent on anyone. Because in this world, there's a calling to live in a way where others might notice our lives, notice the way that we love, notice the way that we lead, and say, what is so different about that person? It shows the world what it looks like to trust in a God who loves and who leads us.
Thanks for joining us here today. There's a lot of great content to explore on Orchard Hill Plus and on the Orchard Hill main feed from the weekend. Have a great day.